Hello and welcome to this Red Gamer Tech video. Myself, Marta, where as always I'm here with the latest from the tech world in the last 24 or so hours. Today I am going to kick things off with a little something from TSMC. Now I know it seems every time I mention their name it's to talk about how well they're doing, but actually we've got something that goes up against that today, as according to a report from DigiTimes, TSMC have revised their first quarter 2019 guidance downwards after they found some defects in its chip wafers. Now you guys may recall this as Paul himself discussed it a little while ago on January the 28th to be exact, but essentially the TLDR is that unfortunately they had a batch of bad materials. There was a batch of a photoresist material that had specific components that was unfortunately treated incorrectly by a chemical supplier, and this created something within the material that affected both 12 and 16 nm wafers for TSMC. Now, TSMC removed a higher number of defective wafers than expected when they first discovered that this problematic batch was a thing, and now they are expecting it to reduce their revenues for the first quarter by 550 million. So not exactly small change, you're talking over $500 million, but on the bright side for them at least, they are expecting to recuperate this loss in the second quarter. So probably in a move to try and combat this, they have moved some Q2 production into Q1, so the loss in the first quarter is expected to be offset somewhat, by the additional $200 million in revenue that was initially going to be in Q2. So they are trying to soften the blow a little bit for themselves here, but it is still undoubtedly going to hit them pretty hard, but they're not too worried for the long term. It's obviously not brilliant that this has happened, and whoever messed up is probably on the wrong end of some very angry phone calls, let's just put it that way. And according to TSMC's report, DigiTimes' report on TSMC, that's what I meant to say, they are now expecting first quarter revenues to be between 7 billion and 7.1 billion, with gross profit margin to be 41 and 43%, and operating profit margin to be between 29 and 31%. But of course we have a lot more to discuss today, and the next topic on our itinerary is actually regarding global Foundries. Now if that name seems familiar, well it obviously should, because well, they once promised to lead the market in 5nm and 7nm advancements, but unfortunately they ducked out of the 10nm race, and AMD then sought to get their 7nm supplies from TSMC. Now they are the third largest semiconductor foundry service provider, and they currently have an 8.4% market share, falling just behind, excuse me for the slight voice crack there, TSMC and Samsung. And now it seems that they are looking for buyers. They are looking to be sold basically wholesale by its investors, and this is after some pretty hefty downsizing on their part. And we have some very interesting names that apparently have their eyes on global foundries, that being none other than Samsung and SK Hynix. Now, interestingly, I actually have a bit of a comment from an industry insider about this, who said, quote, "Global Foundries is unlikely to be bought by a Chinese company such as SMIC, in that the US government is keeping China in check in various industries. The most potential candidates include South Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, and Samsung Electronics can increase its market share to 23% at once if it takes over Global Foundries." So yeah, this would be a pretty huge get for either Samsung or SK Hynix, but it seems just from that comment that Samsung have a lot, and I do mean a lot, to gain by getting them, because of course it's not just the market share, there's all of their patents and obviously all of any talent that wishes to come over and all that sort of stuff. It could be a huge get for either of them, so it's definitely going to be meaningful which company actually ends up buying them out. But speaking of semiconductors, we have a very interesting report from Bloomberg that Facebook, of all people, are working on their very own semiconductor design. Now, according to the Bloomberg report, a chief artificial intelligence researcher for Facebook said to them that they are working on a new semiconductor design specifically made to basically be for AI and handling huge amounts of data. So unsurprisingly, the researchers said that Facebook wants to develop semiconductors that can better train deep learning algorithms by manipulating data all at once, rather than having to break it down into smaller, more manageable tasks. So if these chips actually worked out the way that they're obviously seeking here, it would let deep learning algorithms, should I say, train smarter AI more quickly, and of course would give Facebook the benefit of relying on its own hardware instead of buying from other companies, off-the-shelf products, and so on and so forth. So obviously they would be able to kind of keep their software and their hardware in lockstep. Now, there have been reports floating around since last April that Facebook had intents to design its own AI chips. There was a report from Bloomberg last April that they were hiring a hardware team to design some silicon, and they also said at CES 2019 that they'll be working on the Nirvana neural network processor for inference alongside Intel, but as I'm sure you guys could appreciate almost instantaneously, there is a world of difference between working with a company like Intel with all their resources, knowledge, and obviously the people to actually, make the thing well, and developing a new kind of semiconductor. So again, this is going to be focused on deep learning algorithms, which we have seen companies that take increasing amounts of interest in. Unsurprisingly, AI is obviously where everyone has their eyes fixed, far in the future at least. So this could be very interesting indeed. Of course, this is clearly still in the not even design phase at the moment, so it's going to be a long time before we see anything from this, but it's interesting nonetheless. We're going to finish things up today though with a couple of things from the more gaming side of the world, and the first thing I want to talk about here is actually regarding Scalebound. And if you felt like you would never hear that word again except out of the conversations like, hey, do you remember that game Scalebound? Didn't that look kind of cool? Yeah, it's a shame that it was cancelled. Well, apparently it might actually not be as dead as we previously thought, if a report from NintendoInsider is correct. So apparently, according to NintendoInsider, Nintendo are planning to revive Scalebound and bring it to the Switch. Now, I have a direct quote from NintendoInsider's article here, which reads, quote, "I have confidence in my sources to report that it is my understanding that Scalebound has been resurrected as a project to be released as a Nintendo Switch exclusive. Given Microsoft's previous involvement, it remains unclear to me whether development has been completely rebooted from scratch or at least its ambition scaled back, seeing it's now destined for the nimble but less powerful portable home console." Now, this isn't the only source for this. Kotaku's Jason Schreier, who is usually pretty damn good when it comes to this sort of thing, you may recall that he was the one who leaked a bunch of information about Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag back in the day, and he actually weighed in on this topic on the Resetera forums, and he said, quote, "I'll add to this that Scalebound is coming to Switch was absolutely a rumour floating around last summer." Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily confirm or deny this particular rumour, it just says that this is a rumour that he himself has heard as well. But to also dampen the flames of any excitement you may have here, he also expressed a bit of doubt about Platinum Games actually making another Nintendo Switch exclusive, because he said, quote, "Anyway, didn't Platinum literally just announce an action game with co-op multiplayer as a Switch exclusive? I guess it's possible that Nintendo is also paying for Scalebound, but why would they bother? My guess, and please be clear, this is just a guess, I am not confirming or denying anything, is that Platinum reused a lot of Scalebound's design and tech for Astral Chain, and people are just getting their wires crossed." Now, this is definitely an interesting topic because, well, obviously, Scalebound had a bit of a messy development, as I myself have discussed before. It was one of the reasons why it was cancelled, but the reports that we saw about that game was that it didn't run terribly well on the Xbox One, and we did see a little bit of these performance issues at the Gamescom demo. And you might wonder immediately, okay, so it didn't run too great on the Xbox One, it had performance issues, obviously it was still in development, but still. So you've got the Switch, which is less powerful, so the thought of Scalebound coming over to that is definitely got a bit of a question mark over its head. I mean, I would love Scalebound to still be a thing. Even if they started from zero and completely scrapped everything they did when they were working with Microsoft and just made a brand new game, perhaps downscale with different graphic style or whatever. The idea behind it looked really cool, and I really like Platinum as a development studio, so I would like it to still be a thing, but I don't know. It's hard to say how true or not true this is. It could be, as Jason said, that people are just getting their wires crossed. It could be that something else is going on that we don't know about. It could be that it's not even a full exclusive. It could be a timed exclusive. But Nintendo have shown before their willingness to literally pay for a game to even exist with Bayonetta 2 and of course the upcoming Bayonetta 3 as well. Without Nintendo, those games would not exist. So we could see another case of that here, but it is most likely going to have to be downscaled a lot if it is true. Let me know your thoughts on this one, guys. Would you like to see Scalebound on the Switch? So let's finish things up here with some comments from Shawn Leyden about PlayStation VR. Now, I have discussed virtual reality at length, and I've talked about it a lot recently, as of course we've got a new Oculus model coming out and all this sort of stuff, and I've been talking a lot about how virtual reality, while cool and definitely promising, hasn't really taken the world by storm by any means, and one of those issues is undoubtedly the cost, because, well, you need a high-end PC to run it, and of course the devices themselves aren't exactly cheap, so unsurprisingly we have seen the PlayStation VR be very popular because, well, even though it's not exactly cheap, it is by far the most accessible out of all of the current VR platforms. Now we have some recent comments from Shawn Leyden, the chairman of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios. Just rolls right off the tongue, that does. I was speaking to Game Informer, and he said basically that, well, PSVR is the biggest virtual platform on the market, and he said, quote, "With PlayStation VR, what I like about it, there have been very few times in my career, and I have been working in technology since the late 80s, when you get to be part of a truly 1.0 experience. The problem is nowadays, people's expectations and spans are so short. Now it's, oh, PSVR, that's great, when is it going to be this size? I try to put it in context for people and say, remember that funny Nokia phone that had that ringtone that we all had back in the day? You can't look at that Nokia phone and look at your smartphone and see how you got to there. By the same token, you look at PSVR right now, and none of us are going to be able to imagine what it looked like 10 years from now, but the change will be that dramatic. You can't get to 5.0 until you do 1.0. It's just the nature of the thing. We're working with PlayStation VR and trying to get people to understand that. We wanted to make it the easiest to adopt VR kit. If you have a PS4, you're in. You just need the headset. Super comfortable, easy to put on, easy to take off. Maybe we could have reduced some of the wires a bit, I will say that. Working through the software cycle that supports that, as with any new technology, you have your first generation of games that look like just a lot like the last generation of games, but a little bit better. We talked about PS1 being 3D gaming, but there are a lot of 2D or 2.5D games in the first generation of PlayStation, because the whole idea of creating a 3D game back then was, how do I get my head around that? So the first generation of PSVR content looks like it could have been up on that screen, and we put it in a wraparound headset. That's the nature of it. The developers are getting their head around it. What does this mean? How does this work? Let's get a game as we understand it running in this technology, and let's see where we can go from there. I think the evolutionary cycle that I'd like to point out is Astrobot. Astrobot really cannot be played on a TV. It has to be played in VR, and that was one of our first steps. When we start getting content that can only be realised in VR, then we know we're onto something. I think we're the biggest VR platform in the world. We've learned a lot from that experience. So yeah, it's not exactly surprising to state that the PlayStation VR is the most popular because, well, it is the cheapest. And again, all you need is a PS4 and the headset. Arguably, you could do it with the Move controllers as well, but you don't have to have it. That is an optional thing. So I'm not surprised to see that because, again, as I've discussed at length, ad nauseum, it feels like it's the cost and that sort of barrier to entry of like, look, you need to have this amazing PC. You need to know what parts to get for the amazing PC or whatever in order to actually get it running. But he is very on point, I would say, with his comparison to Nokia. And yes, I do remember the phone he's talking about. I actually had that phone back in the day, and it just makes me feel ancient thinking about it. But we just can't picture what devices are going to look like 5-10 years in the future, and I think the PlayStation VR is a pretty damn good 1.0, as are the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive, but they're probably going to look very silly in comparison to what's in store, but we can't get to there without having been here first. So I'm definitely going to be looking into some actual hard numbers, should I say, in the future. I want to do a sort of breakdown of VR. I think I'll wait a couple of years because I wanted to see exactly how the whole thing plays out. I want to just look and see, at least how it's done over the last couple of years. I think that would be really interesting to look at as just like a video on VR, because I do definitely think it has promise. Anyway, that is me done for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, your support is highly appreciated, and I'll see you next time.